The wooden gavel didn't just end a marriage, it shattered a delusion. When Robert Brown walked into the Superior Court of Chicago that morning, he was holding his mistress's hand, wearing a tailored Italian suit and a smirk that screamed victory. He thought he was leaving with his freedom, his millions, and his youth. He looked at his wife Maggie, sitting alone in a grey cardigan, and saw a woman he had already defeated. But when Judge Pendra adjusted his spectacles and read the fine print of the original incorporation papers, the air didn't just leave the room. It froze. What happens when the man who thinks he's the king discovers the queen was the one holding the keys to the castle all along? This is the story of the silence that fell when the truth finally spoke. The hallway outside courtroom 4B smelled of floor wax and anxious perspiration, a scent specific to family court that no amount of industrial cleaner could mask. It was 8:45 a.m. on a Tuesday in mid-October. Outside, the Chicago wind was whipping rain against the glass, but inside, Robert Brown looked like he was walking on a beach in Saint-Tropez. Robert was 54, though his hair plugs and the aggressive teeth whitening suggested he was fighting a losing war to stay 40. He wore a navy Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars, and on his arm was Jessica Vane. She was 27, a former marketing intern at Brown Logistics, and possessed the kind of sharp, terrifying beauty that made other people nervous. She wore a white sheath dress, a bold, perhaps tasteless choice for a divorce hearing, and clicked her heels loudly against the marble floor. They were laughing. That was the first thing people noticed. In a hallway lined with weeping mothers and stoic, heartbroken fathers, Robert and Jessica were laughing. "I'm just saying," Robert said, his voice carrying intentionally. "After this is done, we should fly straight to Aspen. I don't want to be in the city when she starts moving her boxes out of the lake house. It's going to be depressing." Jessica giggled, squeezing his bicep. "You're terrible, Rob." "But yes, Aspen. I need a spa week after dealing with all this drama." Sitting on a wooden bench 20 feet away was Margaret Maggie Brown. If Robert was a neon sign, Maggie was a shadow. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at a scuff mark on the opposite wall. She wore a charcoal wool skirt and a sensible nondescript cardigan. Her hair, once a vibrant auburn, was now a dignified steel grey, pulled back in a loose bun. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had spent the last 30 years building a home only to watch someone set it on fire. Sitting next to Maggie was her lawyer, a man named Saul Berkowitz. Saul wasn't flashy. He didn't have a billboard on the highway. He was 70 years old, wore a suit that was slightly too large for his shrinking frame, and carried his files in a battered leather briefcase that had seen the inside of a courtroom during the Reagan administration. Robert spotted them and steered Jessica over the predator, needing to toy with the prey one last time. "Morning, Mags," Robert said, flashing that expensive smile. "Saul, hope you two are ready to wrap this up quickly. Jessica and I have a flight to catch at 3. Maggie didn't look up. She smoothed a wrinkle in her skirt. "We're ready, Robert," Saul said, his voice raspy and calm. "We're just waiting for the bailiff." "Look," Robert sighed, checking his Rolex. "I know you guys are hoping for some miracle alimony, but the prenup is solid. I've been generous offering her the townhouse. Don't push it, Maggie. You'll end up with nothing but legal fees." Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Really, Margaret, it's better to just move on. Rob has been more than fair considering everything." For the first time, Maggie raised her head. Her eyes were blue pale and watery, but steady. She looked at Jessica not with anger, but with a strange, detached curiosity, like a scientist looking at a bacteria sample. "Hello, Jessica," Maggie said softly. "I hope you enjoyed the Cayman Islands last week. I saw the photos. The villa looked lovely." Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "How did you—" "Never mind. Stalking my social media won't help you, Maggie. Jealousy is a bad look on you." "It's not jealousy, Robert," Maggie said, turning her gaze back to the wall. "It's documentation." Robert scoffed, guiding Jessica toward the heavy double doors as the bailiff called out, "Brown versus Brown. All parties please enter." "She's delusional," Robert whispered to Jessica as they walked in. "She thinks she has leverage. She has nothing. I built that company from the ground up. I bought every brick of that house. She just lived in it." The courtroom was cold. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low-frequency buzz that set teeth on edge. The Honorable Arthur Pendra sat behind the bench. Judge Pendra was known in Chicago legal circles as the Auditor. He was dry, humorless, and had zero tolerance for theatrics. He didn't care about emotional outbursts. He cared about paper trails. Robert and Jessica sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Robert's legal team. 3 attorneys from a top-tier firm, all looking like sharks circling a drop of blood. On the defense side, it was just Maggie and Saul. It looked like a slaughter. Robert leaned back in his chair, draping an arm over the backrest, winking at Jessica. He had the assets, the power, and the future. Maggie had a sweater that had seen better days, and a lawyer who looked like he needed a nap. But as the bailiff called the court to order, Saul Berkowitz opened his battered briefcase. He didn't pull out a laptop. He didn't pull out a stack of motions. He pulled out a single thick binder, bound in red tape, and placed it gently on the table. The sound of the heavy binder hitting the wood echoed in the silence. Thud. Maggie took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a soldier finally stepping onto the battlefield she had been mapping for months. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Robert stood up, buttoning his jacket, ready to claim his prize. He had no idea that he wasn't walking into a victory lap. He was walking into an autopsy. To understand the silence that would eventually fall over that courtroom, you have to understand the noise that preceded it. The noise of 30 years. Robert Brown met Maggie clear back in 1994. They were both nobodies then. Robert was a dispatch manager for a trucking company, loud and ambitious, but broke. Maggie was a library archivist, quiet, organized, and fiercely intelligent. She was the one who balanced his checkbook. She was the one who packed his lunches. And when Robert had the idea to start his own logistics firm, Brown. Logistics, it was Maggie who took the inheritance she received from her grandmother, $40,000, a massive sum for them at the time, and handed it to him. "Make it work, Rob," she had told him in their cramped one-bedroom apartment. "I believe in you." And he did. Or rather, they did. For the first 10 years, Maggie was the unpaid CFO. She set up the payroll systems, she negotiated the lease on the first warehouse, and she stayed up until 3 a.m. filing tax documents, while Robert was out wining and dining clients. But as the company grew, Robert's memory shrank. By the time Brown Logistics went national, bringing in 8 figures a year, Maggie had been phased out. Robert hired professionals. He told her she deserved to rest, to be a lady of leisure. He moved her into the big house by the lake and told her to focus on charity work and gardening. "You don't need to worry about the boring numbers anymore, babe," he'd said. "I've got it handled." Maggie, trusting him, stepped back. That was her mistake. Or so Robert thought. The drift was slow at first. Late nights at the office. Business trips that extended through the weekend. Then came the gym obsession, the sports cars, and the new wardrobe. Maggie saw it all. She wasn't stupid. She was just patient. Then came Jessica. Jessica Vane was everything Maggie wasn't, any more 20-something loud and willing to laugh at all of Robert's recycled jokes. She started as an intern, moved to executive assistant within 3 months, and was driving a company-leased Mercedes within 6. The affair wasn't even discreet. Robert flaunted it. He took Jessica to industry galas, while Maggie stayed home with the flu. He bought Jessica jewelry on the joint credit card, labeling the expenses as client gifts. The breaking point came 6 months before the court date. It was their 30th wedding anniversary. Robert had forgotten. Maggie sat at the dinner table with a home-cooked meal waiting. At 10:00 p.m. she got a notification on her iPad. It was a synchronized photo from the cloud account Robert hadn't realized he was still sharing with her. It was a selfie. Robert and Jessica clinking champagne glasses in the first-class cabin of a flight to Paris. The caption added by Jessica read, "To new beginnings." Maggie didn't scream. She didn't throw the iPad. She stared at the photo for a long time. The pain was there, a sharp, hot knife in her chest. But beneath the pain was something colder. A realization. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was erasing her. He was using the money she had invested, the wealth built on her sacrifices, to fund his escape with another woman. That night, Maggie didn't sleep. She went to the basement. She dug through boxes of old files from 1994, 1995, 1998. She found the original incorporation papers. She found the loan agreements she had drafted herself when she gave him that first $40,000. She found the shareholder meeting minutes from the early days that Robert had signed without reading because he was too busy celebrating. The next morning, she didn't call Robert. She called Saul Berkowitz. Saul was an old friend of Maggie's late father. He was semi-retired, specializing in contract law, not divorce. "Maggie," Saul had said, sitting in her kitchen looking at the documents she had spread out on the table. "Do you know what this is?" "I think I do, Saul," Maggie replied. "This isn't just a marriage," Saul said, tapping a yellowed piece of paper dated 1996. "This is a partnership, a legally binding business partnership where you are designated as the primary officer for all internal governance. Robert signed this so he wouldn't have to deal with the IRS. Does it still hold up?" Saul smiled a slow, predatory grin that looked out of place on his kindly face. "Robert thinks he's the CEO because he sits in the big chair. But according to this, he's just an employee. You're the owner." "He doesn't remember," Maggie said. "He never read the paperwork back then. He just wanted the checks." "Then we wait," Saul said. "Let him file for divorce. Let him think he's holding all the cards. Let him perjure himself. And when he's standing on the edge of the cliff, we push." So for 6 months, Maggie played the part of the defeated wife. She let Robert serve her papers. She let him lowball her with a settlement offer of the townhouse and a small monthly stipend. She let him parade Jessica around town. She collected receipts, every hotel bill, every diamond necklace bought with company funds, every transfer of cash to offshore accounts. She built a mountain of evidence brick by brick, just like she had built the company. Now back in the courtroom, Robert's lead attorney, a slick man named Mr. Brown, no relation, just expensive irony, stood up to give his opening statement. "Your Honor," the lawyer began pacing confidently, "this is a simple case. Mr. Brown is a self-made man. He built Brown Logistics through his own sweat and blood. Mrs. Brown has enjoyed a life of luxury provided by his hard work. The prenuptial agreement signed in 2000 post-marriage, but valid, clearly states that business assets remain sole property of the primary operator. We are here to ask for a swift dissolution of marriage and the enforcement of that agreement." Robert nodded solemnly, looking like a misunderstood titan of industry. Jessica whispered something in his ear, and he suppressed a smirk. Judge Pendra looked over his glasses at Saul. "Mr. Berkowitz, your opening." Saul stood up slowly. He didn't pace. He held on to the edge of the table to steady himself. "Your Honor," Saul said, his voice quiet, "we do not contest the divorce. My client wants out of this marriage just as much as Mr. Brown does." Robert audibly snorted. "However," Saul continued, his voice hardening slightly, "we contest the distribution of assets, not because of alimony, and not because of fairness." Saul paused, looking directly at Robert. "We contest it because Mr. Brown is attempting to claim ownership of assets he does not legally possess. You cannot take the company in the divorce, Mr. Brown, because the company never belonged to you." The silence in the room changed texture. It went from the silence of boredom to the silence of confusion. Robert leaned forward, whispering loudly to his lawyer. "What the hell is the old bat talking about? I'm the CEO." "It's a stalling tactic," his lawyer whispered back. "Ignore it." But Maggie turned her head and looked at Robert. For the first time that morning, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of the executioner, checking the sharpness of the blade. "Call your first witness," Judge Pendra said, leaning back. The show was about to begin. The plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Brown, again the expensive irony of the name, was lost on no one called Robert to the stand first. This was their strategy, shock and awe. Put the alpha male on display, charm the judge, and make Maggie look like dead weight before she could even open her mouth. Robert walked to the witness stand with the swagger of a man approaching a podium to accept an award. He smoothed his tie, sat down, and winked at Jessica in the front row. Jessica, checking her nails, offered a bored smile. "Mr. Brown," his lawyer began, "could you describe for the court the nature of your contribution to Brown Logistics?" Robert cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone. "Well, simply put, I am Brown Logistics. I conceived the idea in '94. I drove the first truck myself. I knocked on doors. I built the client list from 0 to 400 active accounts. Every system, every logistical route, every dollar of profit came from my vision." "And your wife, Margaret?" the lawyer asked, using Maggie's full name to make her sound distant formal. "What was her role during this growth?" Robert sighed a theatrical exhale of a long-suffering husband. "Maggie. Margaret was a support system in the very early days, sure. She made coffee. She kept the home. But as the business grew, she couldn't keep up. She didn't have the head for it. For the last 20 years, she's been a homemaker. I didn't want to burden her with the stress of the business." "So you would characterize the business assets as solely the result of your efforts?" 100%, Robert said firmly. "I worked 80-hour weeks while she was at the club or gardening. I'm not saying she wasn't a good mother to our cat, but she didn't build the empire." A few people in the gallery chuckled. Maggie didn't. She was writing on a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Brown," the lawyer continued, "let's discuss the finances. You are offering Mrs. Brown the townhouse in Lincoln Park and spousal support of $5,000 a month. Do you feel this is fair?" "I think it's incredibly generous," Robert said, his voice rising with indignation. "Considering I'm the one who generated the wealth, the prenuptial agreement which we signed after the company started making Real money protects the business. I'm trying to be a nice guy here. I just want to move on with my life. Thank you, Mr. Brown. The lawyer sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Pendra turned his gaze to the defense table. Mr. Berkowitz, your witness. Saul Berkowitz stood up. He looked even more disheveled than before. He fumbled with his glasses, dropped a pen, and picked it up slowly. Robert rolled his eyes. This was going to be a cakewalk. Mr. Brown, Saul mumbled, walking slowly toward the stand. Quite an impressive story, truly. Self-made man. We all love that story. It's the truth, Robert snapped. I'm sure, Saul said, flipping through a stack of papers. You mentioned you started the company in 1994. You drove the first truck. You bought the first truck. I did. With what money? Saul asked, looking up over his spectacles. Robert hesitated for a fraction of a second. Savings. My savings. Your savings, Saul repeated. From your job as a dispatch manager, you were making, what, $32,000 a year in 1994. I was frugal, Robert said defensively. Right. Frugal. Saul pulled a piece of paper from his chaotic file. I have here a bank transfer record from August 1994. A transfer of $40,000. It didn't come from your savings account, Mr. Brown. It came from the estate of a Beatrice O'Malley. Who is that? Robert stiffened. That was Maggie's grandmother. Ah. So Maggie's grandmother gave you the money. Maggie gave it to me to help start the business. It was a gift. A gift? Saul tilted his head. Interesting, because I have a document here, written in your handwriting, dated August 12th, 1994. It's titled Investment Agreement. It's not titled Gift. Do you recognize this? Saul had the bailiff hand the document to Robert. Robert squinted at it. It was a napkin, a cocktail napkin preserved in a plastic sleeve. This is a napkin, Robert scoffed. Read the text, please. Saul commanded his voice, suddenly losing its wobble. Robert read his face, flushing slightly. Margaret invests $40,000 for startup. Terms to be decided later. So, Saul said, stepping closer, it wasn't a gift. It was an investment. And you just lied under oath about the origin of the company's capital. It was 30 years ago, Robert shouted. I paid that back 1,000 times over in the lifestyle I gave her. We'll get to the lifestyle, Saul said, turning his back on Robert. Let's talk about that lifestyle you've been living recently. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. The auditor, Judge Pendra, was no longer leaning back. He was leaning forward, his elbows on the bench. Perjury, even over a 30-year-old napkin, irritated him. Saul walked back to his table and picked up a thicker stack of papers. Mr. Brown, you claim that the business assets are yours because you work 80 hours a week. You claim my client is dead weight. You also claim that company funds are strictly for business use. That's correct, Robert said, though he was gripping the armrests of the chair tighter now. Exhibit C, Saul announced. Credit card statements for the Brown Logistics Corporate Amex. Let's look at the month of July. He projected the document onto the screens in the courtroom. July 12th, the Ritz-Carlton, Cayman Islands. 3 nights, $4,200. Well, business expense. I was meeting a potential shipping partner in the Caribbean, Robert lied smoothly. With a guest, too, listed on the invoice, Saul asked. Who is Ms. Jessica Vane? Robert's eyes darted to Jessica. She was frozen in her seat. She's my executive assistant. She was there to take notes. Take notes? Saul mused. Does she usually take notes at Tiffany and Company? Saul flipped to the next slide. July 13th, Tiffany and Company, Georgetown location. Diamond tennis bracelet, $12,400, listed in your accounting software as office supplies. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. That was a clerical error, Robert stammered. My accountant must have miscoded it. It was a client gift. For which client? Saul pressed. The shipping partner in the Caribbean. Yes. The shipping partner wears a lady's diamond tennis bracelet. Robert turned red. It was for his wife. It's called greasing the wheels, Berkowitz. That's how business works. Something you wouldn't understand. Perhaps, Saul said, but I do understand Instagram. Saul signaled to his assistant. A photo appeared on the screen. It was Jessica Vane, tanned and smiling, holding a cocktail in one hand and wearing a sparkling diamond tennis bracelet on the other. The date of the post was July 14th. The caption read, Rob spoils me. #office life, #work trip. Jessica Vane sank low in her seat, covering her face with her hand. Maggie Brown still hadn't looked up from her legal pad. She was drawing a grid. Is Ms. Vane the client's wife? Saul asked. Objection, Robert's lawyer shouted, standing up. Relevance. The infidelity is not on trial here. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state. Your Honor, Saul said calmly to the judge, I am not establishing infidelity. I am establishing the misappropriation of corporate funds. Mr. Brown is claiming the business is his sole property to protect, yet he is treating it like a personal piggy bank to fund a paramour. This goes to the heart of his fiduciary duty. Overruled, Judge Pendra said, his voice icy. Continue, Mr. Berkowitz. Saul turned back to Robert. Robert looked like a cornered rat. Mr. Brown, in the last 2 years, you have spent approximately $450,000 of company money on travel jewelry cars and a luxury apartment lease in downtown Chicago, an apartment where Mrs. Vane currently resides. Is that correct? I am the CEO. Robert exploded. I bring in $50 million a year. I can spend the money how I want. It's my company. Is it? Saul asked softly. Yes. My name is on the building. Brown Logistics. Me. Saul smiled. It was a sad smile. That's the problem with names, Robert. Sometimes we forget what they actually stand for. You see, you keep talking about the prenup from 2000. And you keep talking about being the CEO. But you seem to have forgotten the paperwork you signed in 1996. I didn't sign anything in 96 except tax returns, Robert scoffed. Oh, you signed tax returns, Saul agreed. But to file those specific returns, the ones that saved you about $2 million in corporate taxes back then, you had to restructure the company. Do you remember the S-Corp restructuring strategy your old accountant proposed? Robert blinked. The memory was vague. A hazy afternoon in a strip mall accountant's office. He had been hung over. He just wanted to pay less taxes. He had signed a stack of papers an inch thick. I remember we restructured. So what? So how? Saul said, walking back to his table and picking up the red-taped binder, the one that had made the thud earlier. To qualify for that specific tax bracket and to protect the company from your personal liability lawsuits, remember the truck accident in '95 where you got sued, you transferred the majority ownership. I transferred it to a trust, Robert argued. No, Saul said. You transferred it to the person with the cleanest credit record and no liability. You transferred the Class A voting shares. Saul pulled a document from the binder. It was yellowed parchment with a blue ink signature. Your Honor. Saul said, "I enter into Evidence Defense Exhibit G, the 1996 Brown Logistics Operating Agreement and Shareholder Covenant." Robert felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. Judge Pendra took the document. He put on a second pair of glasses over his first pair. The room went silent. The only sound was the rustle of the page turning. "Mr. Berkowitz," the judge said after a long minute, "am I reading Article 4, Section 2 correctly?" "I believe you are, Your Honor," Saul said. "Mr. Brown," the judge looked down at Robert, "did you read this document before you signed it?" "My accountant told me to sign it," Robert yelled. "It was just legal mumbo-jumbo to save on taxes." "Let me read the mumbo-jumbo to you," Judge Pendra said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a falling guillotine. "To ensure the stability of the entity and protect assets from managerial liability, 51% of Class A voting shares are hereby issued to Margaret Brown. Furthermore, Robert Brown shall retain 49% of Class B non-voting shares and the title of Chief Executive Officer, subject to the approval of the majority shareholder." The judge looked up. "Do you understand what non-voting means?" "Mr. Brown," Robert's mouth opened and closed. "No. That's a mistake. That was just on paper. It wasn't real." "It is filed with the Secretary of State," Saul interjected. "It is very real. And there is one more clause. Article 9, the Fidelity Clause." Saul turned to the gallery, projecting the text on the screen for everyone to see. Article 9, Governance in event of dissolution. In the event that the CEO Class B shareholder files for divorce or separation from the majority shareholder, or is found to be misappropriating funds, the majority shareholder, Margaret Brown, assumes immediate executive control of all assets, bank accounts, and personnel decisions, effective immediately upon the filing of said legal action. Robert's lawyer, the slick Mr. Brown, had gone pale. He grabbed the document from the bailiff. This can't be enforceable. It's archaic." "It's a contract," Judge Pendra said, "and it's notarized. And since Mr. Brown just admitted under oath that he signed it to avoid taxes, he cannot now claim he didn't understand it. You can't have it both ways, counsel. You can't use the law to hide money and then claim the law doesn't apply when it's inconvenient." Robert stood up in the witness box. Wait a minute. You're saying—" "She owns the company." "She has owned 51% of the company since 1996, Saul corrected. "You have been working for her for 28 years, Robert. You're not the owner. You're the employee." Robert looked at Maggie. She was no longer looking at her legal pad. She was looking at him. She stood up slowly. She smoothed her cardigan. The grey mouse was gone. In her place was the woman who had balanced the books, packed the lunches, and silently endured his ego for 3 decades. "Actually, Saul," Maggie said, speaking for the first time since the hearing began. Her voice was clear and melodious. "He's not the employee." She looked at Robert and then at Jessica. "Because as of this morning, right before we entered the courtroom, I convened an emergency shareholder meeting." Robert laughed nervously. "You can't do that. You're just one person." "I am the majority shareholder," Maggie said simply. "And I passed a resolution." She picked up a single sheet of paper from her table and handed it to Saul. "Your Honor," Saul said, suppressing a grin. "Defense Exhibit H, a notice of termination." "Termination," Robert whispered. "Robert Brown is hereby terminated from the position of CEO of Brown Logistics for cause citing gross misappropriation of funds and breach of fiduciary duty." Saul read, He is stripped of his salary, his company vehicle, and his access to corporate accounts effective immediately. The silence that fell was heavy, suffocating. Robert looked at his lawyer. His lawyer was packing his briefcase. "You can't fire me," Robert screamed, his face turning purple. "I built this. I am the face of this company." "Not anymore," Maggie said. "Now you're just a minority shareholder with non-voting stock, which, given the current valuation and the debt you've racked up on the company cards, is worth about as much as that napkin you signed." Jessica Vane stood up abruptly. "Rob, what does this mean?" Robert looked at her, panic in his eyes. "Jess, baby, it's just a legal trick. We'll fight it. We still have the Aspen House, the accounts. The Aspen House is owned by Brown Logistics, LLC, Saul noted helpfully, and the accounts have been frozen as of 9 a.m. this morning, pending a forensic audit." Jessica looked at Robert. Then she looked at the judge. Then she looked at her watch. I have to go to the bathroom," Jessica stammered. She grabbed her purse, the one bought with company funds, and bolted toward the door. She didn't look back. "Jessica!" Robert called out. The door slammed shut. Judge Pendra took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Brown, I suggest you sit down. We still have to discuss the division of your personal assets, which from the looks of it is going to be a very short conversation." Robert sank into the witness chair, a king stripped of his crown, staring at the woman he had underestimated for 30 years. Maggie Brown didn't smile. She just opened a fresh page on her legal pad and wrote one word. "Done." The courtroom doors didn't bang open this time. They didn't need to. The drama had moved from the physical to the financial, and the devastation was absolute. Judge Pendra was no longer looking at Robert with annoyance. He was looking at him with pity. That was worse. Annoyance implies you are a nuisance. Pity implies you are pathetic. "Mr. Brown," Judge Pendra said, adjusting his glasses, "we have established that the business assets, including the Aspen Lodge, the fleet, the downtown apartment, and the corporate accounts belong to Brown Logistics, of which Mrs. Brown is the controlling owner. Now let's address your personal assets." Robert wiped sweat from his forehead. I have my savings. I have my 401k. Saul Berkowitz stood up. He didn't even need the binder anymore. He was enjoying this too much. "Your Honor, regarding the defendant's personal savings, we have the statements here. The balance is, let me check, $4,200. "That's impossible," Robert stammered. "I make $50,000 a month. You spent $60,000 a month," Saul corrected, "on leases, on dinners, on Ms. Vane. You have been living paycheck to paycheck, Mr. Brown, on a CEO's salary. And since you have been terminated for cause, there is no severance package. There is no golden parachute." Robert slumped. He felt like he was falling down a well. "Furthermore," Saul continued, "because the forensic audit has identified $452,000 of unauthorized personal spending on company accounts over the last 2 years, classified as theft under the corporate bylaws, Brown Logistics will be suing you for restitution. We will be attaching a lien to your remaining personal assets." My car?" Robert asked weakly. He drove a Porsche 911. It was his baby. "Leased by the company," Saul said. "We'll be taking the keys today. The bailiff can collect them." "The watch?" Judge Pendra asked, pointing to the Rolex Submariner on Robert's wrist. "Purchased with the corporate Amex in 2022. Saul confirmed. "Inventory item number 402. We'll take that also. Saul, take that too." Robert slowly unclasped the watch. His wrist felt naked. He felt naked. "So," Judge Pendra summarized, scribbling on the decree, Mrs. Brown retains full ownership of the company and all associated real estate. Mr. Brown retains his personal clothing and, well, his freedom, provided he sets up a payment plan for the restitution he owes the company. The judge looked at Maggie. Mrs. Brown, regarding the townhouse in Lincoln Park. You previously lived there. Yes, Your Honor, Maggie said. Mr. Brown offered it to you in his initial settlement. Do you wish to keep it? Maggie looked at Robert. He was broken. He was a 54-year-old man, with no job, no car, no mistress, and $500,000 in debt to his ex-wife. No, Your Honor, Maggie said softly. The townhouse is in his name. He can keep it. Robert looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Maggie. However, Maggie continued, since he has no income to pay the mortgage and the bank will likely foreclose within 3 months, I suppose it doesn't matter. But I don't want it. It smells like his cologne. The gavel came down. Bang. Divorce granted, Judge Pendra declared. Court is adjourned. Robert sat in the chair for a long time after the judge left. His legal team, the Sharks, had packed up quickly. We'll bill you for today, Mr. Brown, the lawyer said curtly, dropping a generic business card on the table before walking out. Robert was alone. He stood up, his legs shaky. He walked out into the hallway, the same hallway where 2 hours ago he had laughed about Aspen. Maggie was standing by the elevators, buttoning her coat. Saul was shaking her hand. Robert walked over to them. He didn't have a choice. He didn't even have money for an Uber. Maggie, he croaked. She turned. Her eyes were dry. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked done. Jessica didn't answer my call, Robert said, his voice trembling. She blocked me. I imagine she did, Maggie said. She was in love with the CEO Robert, not the man. I was the only one who was ever in love with the man. I can fix this, Robert pleaded, reaching out a hand. I can come back to the company. I'll start at the bottom. I'll drive. I know the routes, Maggie. Please. I built it. Maggie looked at his hand, then at his face. She remembered the nights she stayed up doing his taxes. She remembered the $40,000 inheritance she gave him without blinking. She remembered the selfie on the plane to Paris. You didn't build it, Robert, she said, her voice steady. We built it. And then you stole it. And now, I'm taking it back. What am I supposed to do? He whispered. I have nothing. Maggie reached into her purse. Robert's heart leaped. Was she going to give him a check, cash? She pulled out a bus pass. Saul told me you might need this, she said, placing the plastic card in his hand. It's charged for a month. Goodbye, Robert. The elevator doors opened. Maggie and Saul stepped in. The doors closed, leaving Robert Brown standing in the hallway, holding a bus pass, wearing a suit he could no longer afford to dry clean. The bus ride from the courthouse to Lincoln Park was the longest 40 minutes of Robert Brown's life. He sat in the back, squeezed between a teenager playing loud music on his phone and a woman holding 2 grocery bags that smelled faintly of onions. Robert stared out the window, watching the city blur by the city he thought he owned. Every high-rise, every luxury car dealership, every steakhouse he used to frequent, passed him by like a cruel montage of a life that had just been legally amputated. When he finally unlocked the door to the townhouse, the silence that greeted him was heavier than the one in the courtroom. It was a tomb. The furniture was still there. Maggie hadn't taken the sofas or the dining table, but the essence of the home was gone. He went straight to the liquor cabinet. It was locked. He remembered then Maggie had the key. She always kept the key, because he had a tendency to overpour on weeknights. He smashed the glass panel with a heavy brass paperweight and poured himself a stale scotch, drinking it, standing up in the middle of the dark living room. He pulled out his phone to call Jessica. User busy. He called again, straight to voicemail. He sent a text. It's a setback. I have a plan. Call me. The message turned green. Then a notification. Message not delivered. She hadn't just left him. She had erased him. The love that had fueled his ego for 2 years evaporated the moment the credit card limit hit 0. Robert sat on the floor, the expensive Italian wool of his suit picking up dust, and for the first time in 30 years, he wept. Not for Maggie, not for the company, but for the terrifying realization that without his money, he was absolutely no one. 3 months later, the decline of a narcissist is ugly, but the decline of a broke narcissist is tragic. Robert's plan to get back on his feet was a disaster. He assumed his reputation in the industry would save him. He was Robert Brown. He had built a logistics empire. Surely a competitor would hire him as a consultant, a VP, a strategist. He landed an interview with Apex Freight, a rival company he had spent years mocking at trade shows. He wore his one remaining good suit, now slightly loose as he'd lost weight from stress and a diet of instant noodles. The CEO of Apex, a man named Jim Miller, didn't meet him. Instead, Robert was interviewed by a 30-year-old operations manager who spent the entire meeting looking at his iPad. "Mr. Brown," the manager said, chewing on a pen, "your experience is extensive, but we've heard about the audit. The forensic accounting at your former firm. That was a misunderstanding." Robert lied, his voice tight. "A messy divorce. My ex-wife is vindictive." "Right," the manager said, swiping a finger across the screen. "Well, word on the street is that you authorized $500,000 in non-business expenses. We run a tight ship here. We can't have that kind of liability in management." "I don't need to be in finance," Robert pleaded, the desperation leaking out. "Put me in logistics. I know the routes. I know how to cut fuel costs by 10%. "We use AI for routing now," the manager said dismissively. "Thanks for coming in, Bob. We'll keep your resume on file." Bob. Nobody had called him Bob since 1993. The townhouse went into foreclosure in December. Robert moved into a studio apartment in a neighborhood he used to tell his drivers to avoid after dark. He sold the Porsche tires the car was repossessed, but he had a winter set in the garage the bailiff missed to pay the deposit. He spent his days watching daytime TV and drinking cheap beer. He watched the snow fall against the dirty window pane, thinking about Aspen. He thought about Maggie. He realized with a sickening clarity that Maggie hadn't just been the money. She had been the engine. She filtered his bad ideas. She smoothed over his temper tantrums. She kept him human. Without her, he was just a loud noise in an empty room. Meanwhile, at Brown & Conan, the transformation of the company was nothing short of miraculous. Maggie didn't just change the name. She exorcised the ghosts. She fired the sales bros, 3 executives Robert had hired, who spent more time on the golf course than in the office. She reinvested their inflated salaries into the fleet. She fixed the air conditioning in the warehouse. She set up a daycare stipend for the administrative staff. The atmosphere shifted from fear to focus. Drivers stopped quitting. Clients who had left because of Robert's arrogance returned charmed by Maggie's quiet competence. Saul Berkowitz, now fully retired, came in every Tuesday for lunch. They would sit in Maggie's office now, painted a soft sage green, the heavy mahogany desk replaced with a functional glass one. "You look 10 years younger, Maggie," Saul said, watching her review a spreadsheet. "I feel 10 years younger," she replied, taking a bite of a turkey sandwich. "I didn't realize how much energy it took to constantly manage his ego. It was a full-time job on top of the actual job." "Have you heard the rumors?" Saul asked gently. Maggie paused. "About Robert. He's living in a studio on 45th. He's working part-time as a night security guard at a mall." Maggie looked out the window. She felt a twinge of something, not love, not hate, but a distant, aching pity. It was the feeling you get when you see a dog that has been kicked too many times. "He was a good driver once," Maggie said softly. "Before the money, before the suits. He could back a 53-footer into a loading dock with 2 inches of clearance blindfolded. That's who I married. I don't know who the man in the courtroom was." "Well," Saul said, "that man is gone. The question is there anything left of the old Robert?" Spring arrived in Chicago, bringing the wet grey slush that turned the roads into a nightmare. Brown and Company was expanding. They had secured the Amazon Midwest contract, a massive deal that required 20 new drivers immediately. Maggie posted the ads everywhere. Experienced CDL drivers needed, competitive pay, benevolent management. On a Tuesday in late March, the intake line snaked out the door of the warehouse. Maggie was up in her tower watching. She liked to see the new hires. Then she saw him. He was wearing a faded windbreaker and jeans. He looked older. His face was lined, his skin pale. The hair plugs were gone, replaced by a mostly bald scalp that he made no attempt to hide. He wasn't standing with his chest puffed out. He was standing with his shoulders slumped, holding a plastic cup of coffee, reading a paperback book while he waited. Robert Brown. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. The audacity, she thought initially. Does he think he can just waltz back in here? She buzzed the intake manager, a sharp young woman named Chloe. "Chloe," Maggie said into the intercom. "The man in the blue windbreaker near the back of the line. Send his application directly to me after he fills it out. Don't interview him yet." "Copy that, Mrs. Brown." 10 minutes later, the digital file appeared on Maggie's screen. Name, Robert Brown. Previous experience, 30 years, logistics. Reason for leaving last job. Corporate restructuring/personal reasons. Position applied for route driver night shift. He wasn't applying for management. He wasn't applying for a desk job. He was applying for the night shift, the hardest, loneliest shift running freight from Chicago to Indianapolis and back every single night. Maggie stared at the screen. She remembered the bus pass she had given him. She remembered the look on his face when the judge took his watch. She picked up the phone. "Saul, he's here." "I figured he might show up." Saul's voice crackled. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. If I hire him, is it charity or is it torture?" "Maybe it's neither," Saul said. "Maybe it's just business. Is he qualified?" "He's the best driver we ever had," Maggie admitted. "Then hire him," Saul said. "But Maggie, don't save him. Let him save himself." Robert sat in the small plastic chair in interview room B. He was sweating. He recognized the smell of the warehouse diesel dust and cardboard. It was the smell of his youth. It was the only place he had ever truly fit in before he convinced himself he was a king. The door opened. Robert braced himself to see Maggie. He prepared himself for the gloating, the lecture, the "I told you so." But it wasn't Maggie. It was the fleet manager, a burly guy named Mike, who had been with the company for 5 years. Mike knew exactly who Robert was. Mike used to get yelled at by Robert for not wearing a tie. "Hello, Robert," Mike said, sitting down heavily. "Hi, Mike," Robert said, looking at his hands. "This is weird, Bob," Mike said honestly. "I know," Robert whispered. I just need work, Mike. I can't pay my rent. I know the routes. I have a clean CDL. I won't cause trouble. I just want to drive." Mike looked at the application. He looked at the man who used to fly first class to Paris while his drivers were sleeping in truck stops. He saw the defeat in Robert's eyes. It was total. "I have to clear this with the owner," Mike said. "I understand," Robert nodded. "She'll probably say no." Mike typed a message on his laptop. A moment later, a reply pinged. Mike looked up surprised. "She says you're hired. Probationary period of 90 days. 0 tolerance for lateness. And you start at the base rate. No seniority." Robert let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 6 months. Tears pricked his eyes. "Thank you. Thank you, Mike." "Don't thank me," Mike said, standing up. "She also said one more thing." "What?" "She said, tell him to check the tire pressure on truck 42. It runs low in the cold." Robert managed a weak, genuine smile. Truck 42, his old favorite, the one he drove in 1998 when they were just starting out. She remembered. That night the rain had turned to a light snow. The yard was bathed in the harsh orange glow of the floodlights. Robert walked across the asphalt, his steel-toed boots crunching on the gravel. He carried a thermos of coffee and a sandwich wrapped in foil. He walked up to truck 42. It was a new model, but the number was painted on the bumper in fresh white paint. He ran his hand along the cold metal of the door. He climbed up into the cab. It smelled of industrial cleaner. He settled into the air suspension seat. It felt like a throne, a real one this time. Not a throne of lies and credit debt, but a throne of work. Honest work. He turned the key. The diesel engine roared to life, a deep, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through his chest. Up in the main building on the 4th floor, the lights in the corner office were off. But Maggie was still there. She stood in the darkness watching the yard. She saw the lights of truck 42 flicker on. She saw the brake lights flare red. She watched as the massive rig slowly, expertly reversed, hooking up to the trailer in one smooth, continuous motion. No hesitation. No corrections. Perfect alignment. "Drive safe, Robert," she whispered to the glass. She turned away, picked up her purse, and walked to the elevator. She had a company to run, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't worried about the past. She was looking forward to the future. Down below, Robert Brown checked his mirrors, signaled left, and pulled his truck out onto the highway, merging into the flow of traffic, just another anonymous set of headlights in the endless river of the night. He was nobody special. And for the first time in his life, he was free. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the silence that fell. Robert thought the court system was a game he could win with a smile and a suit. But he forgot the golden rule of business. Read the fine print. Maggie didn't win because she screamed the loudest. She won because she kept the receipts. It's a brutal reminder that arrogance is a loan with a very high interest rate, and eventually life comes to collect. What do you think? Did Maggie let him off too easy by hiring him back as a driver? Or is that the ultimate punishment, working for the wife you betrayed? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy one coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket in a place his greedy family would never look. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always has a way of coming out. See you next time.